Hello and welcome to the Thursday episode of Stand Up, episode 539, I think. This is going to be one guest and no news because I'm trying to take a couple of days off this week, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't, because here's the deal. I was going to take the day off, and then at the end of the day, I read an article by Tim Wise, who I absolutely love, and I said, I gotta tape a conversation with him. I want to talk to Tim. And so the idea that I can read an article and then get the author of the article on and on the phone and then tape it and share it with you is never lost on me. And I always think I don't want to be alone in reading this article, and I want so many other people to read and hear about what he's writing. So I said, let me just do it. Let me record it and let me put it out there, and then we can go from there and see what happens on Friday. But yes, also no hangout tonight. I wanted to remind you of that because I have to go to a Board of Education meeting, and I can't do it. So I might do it Friday night. I might do it Saturday night, but I'm going to miss you tonight because I have responsibility to the folks, my daughters, really, and the school and the community that I'm in. I've got to do that. So we will do it, but not tonight. Look out for the email if you're a subscriber. If you're not a subscriber, what are you waiting for? Welcome to new subscribers, by the way. And join now, standupwithpete.com or patreon.com/Pete Dominic. All right, so Tim Wise, been writing, as always, a lot of really good stuff lately. And you got to follow him at timjwise.medium.com. He's got an article titled Whoopi Goldberg's Suspension is Ridiculous. It's an important piece. If Joe Rogan is a guy's guy, we need fewer guys is another piece he just posted, which is really, really great. He also talked about the racists that have been threatening the historically black colleges and universities because black excellence threatens racists, and so much more at his Medium site where he posts all of his essays and articles, timjwise.medium.com. Of course, he's also awesome on Twitter at Tim Jacob Wise, and you can support him on Patreon and follow and watch him. And soon I'm going to be posting hopefully all of my videos with him on my YouTube page. But check him out online, of course. And here it is, my conversation from last night with Tim Wise. And today, by the way, I am going skiing with longtime listener and subscriber who I absolutely love, Carrie Williams. Going to be me and Carrie on the mountain, Wyndham Mountain. If you want to come up, join us in the Catskills. And now, here's my conversation with Tim Wise. And I've got him now. And I just realized, Tim, you're one of the most respected guests here on the show, and you've been on the show as much as anybody, and yet, I'm just throwing this out there, none of our talented artists and musicians listening has yet to write you an intro jingle. And I want to throw it out there for someone listening. We've got so many of them at this point. I mean, you would be welcome to an intro jingle, a special one for you here, right?
Absolutely. That'd be great. Yeah, it'd be an honor. Sure.
Has anybody ever written a song about your work?
Never. No, never. No. And I wouldn't even know what such a thing might sound like, but I'm excited to learn, I guess.
I have a strong feeling you're about to learn. Okay, I look forward to our next conversation.
It'll be the song from Welcome Back, Kotter.
All right. Well,
because I'm back here so often, so it'll be that.
Any information you want to give out about yourself will be worked into the song. You should be forewarned.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to keep it real close to the vest then.
All right. Well, I'm psyched to have you here. As you heard, I was really trying to take the day off, and I was trying to punch out of social media and anything. And then I of course, I turned on Twitter. I saw your article. And I said, I got to talk to Tim. If he's available to talk, I'll tape it and I'll post it for tomorrow. And you were available, and I'm always grateful. Thank you very much for joining me.
You bet. Good to be here.
Your article, I want to really make sure I spend a good amount of time on this. I think it's so important. It's titled, If Joe Rogan is a Guy's Guy, We Need Fewer Guys. The sexism of bro culture doesn't only demean women, it's also an insult to men. It's such an important point, and this is such a really good article that kind of illustrates what you're talking about here with the headline. Why are you've talked about the racism, you've obviously heard, and I'm not sure if you've written about some of the bullshit science, pseudoscience that he's in, but why this? Why sexism, misogyny, bro culture?
Well, I've always had opinions about that stuff, and I have written a few things about it, but it just seemed to me that in the midst of all this stuff with Joe, there's been a sort of not apology, but oh yeah, Spotify's decided to put a thing up about the COVID stuff, and sort of a backing off a little bit on that. There's been the apology for the 24 times usage of the N-word. Not an apology for some of the other racist shit that he allowed on his show from guests or even encouraged, but there's been nothing even remotely comparable to that when it comes to the misogyny. And really, if you listen to his catalog, I mean, there's thousands of shows. I'm not going to pretend that I've listened to all of them. I have listened to some. I've certainly seen enough clips, and not out of context, but very much in context clips, to know that this sort of, douche bro stuff that dudes do, that he encourages and that he participates in, is a central part of the ethos of the Joe Rogan, experiment or experience, whatever the hell it's called, the Joe Rogan thing. And I give a couple examples in the piece that are egregious, dismissing a woman with a PhD who's a primatologist who was on the show, who knows what she's talking about. She went to school to learn about primates, and she's trying to explain to him that he doesn't know his ass from his elbow about some ape that he believes exists, which is like Bigfoot, basically. Not exactly that, but it's an ape that doesn't exist. And she comes on and says, well, I hate to tell you this, but this ape you're talking about isn't real. And he goes, oh, you're an idiot. I think he says, fucking idiot. You need to do your own research. She has a PhD. He has a high school diploma, a Taekwondo belt, and a Google machine. Not the same. And so he then proceeds to say, as she gets off the line, that she has a vagina, and therefore that's supposed to mean that she's not credible. That's not just like typical comic banter. And to the extent that comics do that shit, it's incredibly unoriginal. It's like his stand-up routine where he talks about, he does this whole bit about women who he calls ladies, because that's his thing, who never invented anything. And as I said in my previous piece about him, it's like 1959 called. They would really like their 100 Zingers for All Occasions book back. It's just this incredibly dated sexist bullshit that he hasn't apologized for, and he's not going to. He's not going to. And, the fact that now that video has surfaced of Joey Diaz, an even worse comic, in 2011 on his show, doing this, not doing a routine, not doing a bit, but bragging about having forced women to give him head basically at a LA comedy club in order to get time on the mic. And he said he did this with over 20 women. He joked about how one of them later said that he had broken her. This is an acknowledgement of criminal activity. And Joe Rogan, in the clip, which you can watch, it's all over the web right now, doesn't look at him and go, doesn't do one of those nervous, oh shit, this is weird, I don't really know how to respond to this kind of laugh, which even that wouldn't be okay, but you could sort of understand it because it's such a weird thing for Diaz to have acknowledged. Yeah. But instead, he rolls back in his chair, puts his hands up, starts clapping, laughing like it's the funniest shit he ever heard. The guy just acknowledged 20 felonies on his show. And instead of being like, it's really funny, Coco, can you sit here while I call the cops? Because that's actually what he should have done and what a decent person would do. He just sort of laughs it off and goes about his business. This kind of thing, as I say in the piece, it's not just misogynistic. It's obviously that's easy. But what bothers me about this is that men accept this behavior from ourselves. We accept this from other men. And so the irony of this bullshit is that it's incredibly hateful to men. It basically says that we are, lizard brain automatons who can't not rape, who can't not laugh at rape jokes. It's like, well, we can't help it. We're guys. And the irony is any woman who stood up and said, men, they're just monsters. They're just monsters and they'll never change. And they can't do any better than this because that's just how they are. We would go, you're a man hater, probably call that person a lesbian, say she just, needs, we know what she needs. And we would be angry at a woman who said, but then we say that every time we laugh at that bullshit, we're saying that. So what we're saying is that men suck. And I just find it incredibly despairing and dispiriting that somebody who is, got all these men on this hook listening to what he has to say is giving them such an incredibly abysmal standard about what it means to be a man. It's one thing to say it's misogynistic. That's easy and it's obvious, but it's also misandry, which is hatred of men. I mean, it's just this incredibly pathetic standard that we ought to be better than. And I think we are. I mean, that's the irony of it. I think men actually are better than that, or can be. But, we're being encouraged by bottom feeders not to even try.
But one of the only ways to be a better man is to have your role models be better men. And we realize how behaviors are learned. And when it comes to sexism and all of everything understands that these are learned behaviors, how you treat a person or how you treat a woman in this case. You write, if you think rape is funny, that forcing women to perform oral sex to get a job or opportunity is hilarious, your expectations of manhood are depressing as fuck. You go on later to say, by tolerating such behavior and commentary, we say that Joey Diaz is an acceptable prototype for a man. The point you're kind of making over and over, and you've always made in your career, and I think you've role modeled as a man, is we have to be better, act better, and role model better behavior and not laugh at or encourage terrible behavior, and certainly not look the other way if a crime is committed for there to be real change.
Right. And I mean, I don't expect, men who are raised in that culture to automatically get that. In fact, I expect that we won't. So it's obviously a journey, and it's obviously a struggle, and it's always aspirational. I'm trying to be that better man. I don't always succeed at it. I would be lying if I said I don't have sexist thoughts or say sexist things, just like I'd be lying if I said I don't have racist thoughts and have done racist shit in my life, like in terms of the way I've responded or thought about things or, so part of it is having the humility to acknowledge that. But there's a difference between falling into the traps that the culture set for you, even doing that sort of often, and sort of celebrating falling into those traps like it's a bit, like it's hilarious. It's one thing to go, God, I can't believe I did that, and I'm really trying to do better. It's quite another to laugh and to act like this shit is funny and to try to deny the lived experience of women by diminishing the reality of things like sexual assault, by diminishing the reality of things like just everyday sexist comments that we make, the casual misogyny. It's one thing to fall into it and then catch yourself. It's another thing to fall into it and go, yeah, that's sort of just how we are. And we're just going to keep at it. And in fact, it's sort of our brand, right?
The other criticism of Joe, or at least my criticism of him, has always been that he hasn't platformed enough women, period. And
right, like 88% of his guests are men.
Is that right? Yeah.
Something like that. It's in the 80s, which is extraordinary.
I don't know what percentage of my guests are men, but I think about it all the time. I know there's more men than women, but I always want to change that. I'm always conscious of it. And more importantly, I'm talking about these issues, gender, sexuality, feminism, all of it with women. And that's the other thing. If he does have women, they're not necessarily the type that would challenge him on many of these beliefs that you're here criticizing. That's what he could do, is have a thoughtful conversation with some scholarly, woman, or strong, brilliant, articulate woman who can call out his bullshit. It would be great. It would be great for him. Right. It would be great for everybody, but he doesn't do it.
Right. Well, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, on the one hand, he sort of poses as this iconoclastic, I'm just here for the brain food kind of guy, right? Who just like, we just want to explore. And so he does things about UFOs, and he does things about, and that's cool. Like, whatever, that's fine. But if you're going to then venture into current events and politics and social issues, and you say that you're just wanting to explore all these opinions, but you're not, right? You have guests on who attack critical race theory. You ain't had any critical race theorist on. You have people on who attack feminism. You're not having feminists on. You have people who attack, the left in this sort of broader sense. You're not having any leftists on. I mean, I'm sorry, Sanjay Gupta is not a leftist, right?
And he's not even a good representative of the medical community. He got his ass kicked by Joe Rogan on the issue of COVID. I mean, Joe is righter than he was.
This idea that, it's one thing if you want to have a show that's branded as a conservative talk show, well, then fine. Like, the entire networks are built around that. And there's no shame in that if that's what you want to do. But there's a falsity in the advertising here when you suggest that I just want to explore all these opinions, and then you don't really explore that. So you have Alex Jones on. There is nobody that he's having on. He doesn't bring the families of the Sandy Hook victims.
Right.
on to talk about Alex Jones. He doesn't bring the people on who want to rebut Candace Owens, but he has her on, Milo Yiannopoulos. He has Stefan Molyneux, for God's sake, who is a neo-fascist philosopher and virtually a cult leader. If you actually look into some of his background, he has Chuck Johnson, who denies that there were gas chambers in Auschwitz, and got on his show. He didn't do that on the show, but he did that on a Reddit thing several years ago, and then went on his show and said that, racial crime differences in the black community, higher crime rates are caused by a gene that black people have, which is scientific bullshit. Chuck Johnson, by the way, doesn't have a genetics background, doesn't have a science degree of any kind, but he has him on to talk about science shit. Like, if you want to have Chuck Johnson on to talk about, what it means to be a right-wing troll, well, he knows that shit really, really well. He could come on and talk about how he insinuates himself into all of these situations, like getting Matt Gaetz to invite him to the State of the Union address several years ago. But he's not an expert on the Holocaust. He's not an expert on science. I think he wrote a book about, was it Calvin Coolidge or some shit?
Really?
Right. Exactly.
The issue I'm seeing with all of this with Rogan or anybody in that world is if you have 11 million listeners per episode or something, and if you're platformed by a major company or corporation, like, at what point, Tim, do you or me or anybody else cut out a piece of the budget of our revenue, of our income, to hire editors, fact checkers, researchers, or even an ombudsman? Anything to make sure that you're getting out the most accurate information, someone to push back on what you're doing, people that can kind of oversee what you're doing. I think that once you get to a certain critical mass, and certainly a certain income, and if you have any kind of platform the way he does at Spotify, you have to have people that are editors of some sort to make sure that the terribly wrong information, certainly when it comes to vaccines, et cetera, it does not get out. I don't understand how. I mean,
there are literally lives on the line with that. I mean, but look, it isn't even clearly with a budget like that, he should do it. And with income like that, he should do it. But, when I write my books, I don't just put stuff in the books that are, when I footnote them, I check those footnotes. I do the research. My editor then checks them. And if we make a mistake, we go back and we put it on the website, and sort of clarify what the thing is so you can find it. And that wasn't with a budget. I work with a small publisher, City Lights in San Francisco. I don't have a staff, but I managed to do that. So if I can do that, I think he, with his operation, could. And the fact that he doesn't means it isn't a priority, which if you want to say hey, man, it's entertainment. OK, then do that. If you want to do the entertainment thing, then have comics on and have entertainers on and have MMA fighters on but if you start delving into serious shit where people's lives and opportunities are on the line, the standard has to be ratcheted up, because the line between, entertainment and information has been so blurred. It's not all his fault, right? I mean, this is just modern media atmosphere. Yep. But a decent person has to sit there and think a couple steps ahead. What are the impacts of my words? And unfortunately, we're in this place where we're all arguing about freedom of speech. And we're saying, well, I have a right to say whatever I want. He has a right to have whoever he wants on his. No one's arguing that. I have a right to stand in the middle of Central Park and yell slurs at passersby. But if I do that under the guise of free speech in some sense, I'm an asshole. And I should be called an asshole, and I should be understood as an asshole. And I certainly should not get a $100 million deal to scream slurs at people in the park, nor would I be given that. So we have to think about how we are responsible or irresponsible with our speech. It's not about saying you can't say it. If he has the right to be as sexist as he wants to be and as racist as he wants to be, whether that's on the air or in his own private life. But a good person would sit there and think to themselves, God, what is the impact of what I'm saying? And I honestly do believe, as I said in the piece about race and Rogan, I really do think that because I've been doing the race thing for years, and I am never, ever. This is one piece of advice I always give to people. Never underestimate just how ignorant other white people are when it comes to the most basic racial shit. like not saying the N word or like not doing blackface or like not, or like, yes, there's a reason why there's a Black History Month and not a White History Month. Like just the most basic 101 level stuff that we think everybody understands just because we've gone over it a million times. And then there's that 1,000,001 person who's like, well, why isn't there a National Association for the Advancement of White People? Well, that's racist. Like people say that shit who were not even like inherently dumb people. They're just people that have never been in the conversation. Yeah. So when Joe Rogan says, I didn't really consider the impact of my words or some of my guests, he might very well be telling the truth. I'm not saying he is for sure, but at least in those earlier times when he used the word or did that shit, like he might really not have been thinking about it. That's not an excuse, though. And it's not the point, right? The point is, what does it mean? And this is what I tried to write in that other piece. What does it say when you don't have to think about the impact of your words, when it's about race, when it's about gender, when it's about sexuality, when it tells me that you're probably white, you're probably male, you're probably straight, you're probably cisgendered, and you probably ain't poor either, because poor folks have to think about that shit. So being white, being male, being straight, being affluent, being cisgendered allows you the privilege of sitting back and acting like, doop, 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 doop. I can just say whatever, and I don't have to think about the consequences of my word. That's incredibly privilege. And so part of getting to a place where we can actually have productive conversations is when people can sit there and go, God, I want to say this. This is how I feel, but I want to figure out a way to say it that isn't going to be hurtful. That's just called being an adult. Like, to not have a filter is to be either Donald Trump or 3 years old.
So much of my growth as a man has come through talking into a microphone to an audience for 15 years and having people call me out. So much. Giving me their honest and perspective in a thoughtful way. That's how I've grown, probably more than anything else. And therefore, I have no mercy for someone with a much bigger platform than myself. And especially all of these comedians, because that's certainly how I started and what a lot of people still think I only do. And it's certainly not the case. That when you're as big as he is, and we have that many people listening, they're correcting you. And a lot of them are doing it thoughtfully and politely. But more importantly, when it comes to things like vaccines, Rogan had Peter Hotez. He had Michael Osterholm. They are the best in the business. He had them on at the beginning, so he can't plead ignorance. Sam Harris, who is completely, you've written and talked all about his views on race, but when it comes to the vaccines, Harris has been in line with pretty much every infectious disease expert, epidemiologist, etc. He has said on his show publicly that he's been telling Joe, stop this nonsense, don't do it, and privately. I reached out to Joe. Peter Hotez reached out to Joe. Stop this. You're wrong about this. There's no excuse for it, Tim. When you are as big as he is, or even as I am, you have people telling you, real smart people, you're wrong. Don't say that again. There's no excuse for it.
Well, and in Rogan's case, I saw the clip today that was going around on social that when he had Peter on and he's talking about he's really sort of mocking the anti-vax people. He's mocking people who don't believe in vaccinations as being ridiculous conspiracy theorists. He's talking about how great vaccines are and the science behind them. It's like, where's that guy? That was in March of 2020 or February. Is early. It was like early on, and he's acknowledging all of this. And the fact that he changed tells us, one of two things, right? Either number one, he decided that all the actual experts he'd had on, who he had praised and who had praised him for amplifying the truth, that he decided they were all wrong and Chia Mama 420 on Reddit was right, right? Or, and this is even scarier and I think more likely, he decided there was more controversy and therefore a better grift in suddenly sowing doubt and playing to this part of the audience that just wants to be iconoclastic and be contrarian and be transgressive for the sake of being transgressive. And this is increasingly a thing, right? It's this misanthropic, somewhat antisocial. I don't have a psych background, so I don't want to overclaim my expertise here, but I've been in therapy long enough to know some of this shit. And I know that there's a psychology behind this sort of like, I'm going to grab my nuts and flip off the world just to do it. Like normal, healthy people don't do that. Like that's not a healthy thing to do. So if that's your thing, if you're just thinking like it's punk rock, man, it's just I'm being transgressive. Fuck it. You know, it's like when the Sex Pistols put swastikas on their shirts and shit, right? It's like that. I'm going to do that shit just because it'll piss off the shit libs and it'll bother them and it'll, you know, and if you're, I'm not saying that you should like lead your whole life to never piss anybody off. Obviously, I piss a lot of people off with the stuff that I say. You piss people off with the stuff you say. But I don't go out. I don't sit down and think to myself, how can I just fuck somebody's day up today? Like, you know, like how can I just say some shit that'll just make this group angry just so I can be like, yeah, I busted one off on them today. Like what?
Well,
like,
but that is about understanding media and how to get eyeballs and ears on what you're saying. So it's certainly obviously about that, but it's probably even more specifically, and certainly in a guy like Rogan and so many others' case, it's just be somehow alternative in your theory when it comes to science or when it comes to any of this, but finding some, you know, someone without credibility, but is able, you know, like a Jordan Peterson. Like, however that guy's career has defined itself, serious, intelligent people don't take him seriously, but he's great for millions of young men, for sure.
He is a really uneducated person's version of an educated person. I mean, I mean, really and truly, like, there's not. It's like just because he ends every sentence with a, like you think that makes him erudite and intelligent just because he has this Canadian accent and you're like, what? Like, okay, so what is he saying? First of all, he makes things up. He doesn't understand most of the disciplines that he claims to understand. He doesn't have backgrounds in those things, but he says it with this sense of certainty. And the stuff that he does say that makes sense, like in his Rules for Life or whatever that book was, right? Like there's decent stuff in there, but it's like common sense stuff, right? So the stuff that he's saying that's right, he didn't come up with. And the stuff that he came up with ain't right. You know, so why does he have this cachet? Well, I think because he takes very complicated realities and boils them down into very simplistic, not sound bites, but simplistic nuggets that people who haven't really done a lot of delving into these areas can sort of grasp onto. And this is a fundamental problem for the left and for progressives, right? Is that modern media culture does not favor us. And it's not because we're not capable of being funny and entertaining. You're funny, you're entertaining. I'd like to think that I'm funny and entertaining. There are plenty of people who are on the left who are capable of holding an audience. That's not it. The problem is that the modern culture, if you're thinking about talk radio, or if you're thinking about a lot of social media, it rewards a lack of nuance, right? It rewards a lack of ambiguity. And the problem for those of us who are liberal or progressive or left is that we sort of live in the ambiguity and we're okay with that. It's like it's like we really want to find out. We have some opinions and they're very strongly held, but we're also usually willing to acknowledge shit, we could be wrong. And therefore that's why I'm always researching more of the stuff that I think I know, because I don't want to just like sit there and rest on what I knew last week. But there is, brain science research on this that says that people on the right tend to be, and this isn't even meant pejoratively, it's just descriptive, are far more likely, the sort of right-wing brain, quote unquote, is far more likely to be uncomfortable with nuance and ambiguity and like very binary black-white thinking, right? And so, talk radio plays to that, right? Dan Bongino plays to that. Ben Shapiro plays to that. Rush used to play to that. All these guys play to that, but Mark Levin plays to that. Social media does that. 280 character tweets doesn't allow for a lot of nuance. Most people aren't going to do complicated threads. YouTube videos, if you go more than 3 or 4 minutes, people start tuning out most of the time. So to me, we're at a disadvantage. And yet here's Joe Rogan, who has 3 fucking hours, right? This is like the glitch in that theory. Joe Rogan has 3 hours a day. He could be doing a lot of good with that 3 hours if he was I'm not even saying like become a raving progressive, because that's not who he is. I'm okay with him being who he is, right? But if you really are going to say you want to explore all the depth of these issues, you got 3 hours a day to do it every day and 11 million people listening. You could actually provide a platform to the best and the brightest from around the spectrum. Like if you want to have conservative people on, there are plenty of super bright conservative people. You're not at Milo Yiannopoulos is not one of them. Right. Chuck Johnson is not one of them. Alex Jones is not one of them. Right. So he's got this opportunity and then he squanders it.
That's the weirdest. That's the weirdest thing to me, because that's exactly what I've done my whole career. And the whole idea was I'm a comedian with no education, and but I'm good enough and smart enough, because I'm Stuart Smalley apparently, to find smart people and ask them good enough questions. That's what that's what he purports to be doing. The difference is he's not finding the smartest people, and he's not finding certainly the issue that you point to, people that understand. There's a lot of nuance in his conversations, but it's ignorant and often not factual. Let me just take you down this road for one more minute, because one of the examples where this plays out constantly, and you've written about this for years, is with poverty. I mean, I just had this, and we both had this way too many times in our life, and it's so infuriating, this conversation I had with, someone in my community Facebook page, where basically he's like, I was born into poverty, I made good choices, and I was responsible. Bad choices have consequences. That's it. It's about choices. Right. There's no nuance in why somebody struggles in life, much less in terms of making a career, making money, staying out of prison. Nothing. It's just choices. Maybe just take that one on to kind of unpack how on earth.
It's such a deeply held American, ideology of this rugged individualism mentality. But it's so absurd. Look, there have always been people, right, who managed to crawl out of the worst forms of marginalization. There were folks, I'm quite certain, who, after the stock market crashed in 1929 and the Depression started, left to their own devices. Some of them would have managed to crawl out, and some of them would have managed to escape this massive impoverishment that had happened when the economy melted down. But that begs the question as to what our public obligation was to create the opportunity structure for people to make good choices and to then reward those choices when they were made by making sure that there were jobs available created by the government with the New Deal, for instance. Because if I want to choose to work really hard, but the jobs aren't there, that choice isn't going to matter a whole hell of a lot. So the state says, we're going to do this. That's going to allow you to have a broader range of choices. The fact that some of those folks might have figured it out on their own could or could not be true. I don't know. But that doesn't answer the question about what our obligations are. It's like if I am walking by a chemical plant at the moment that it explodes because of some idiot in the plant like didn't turn off a valve and the pressure built up and the whole damn thing explodes, and it injures me and blows my leg off as I'm walking by the plant. It's not going to do for you to say when I come for compensation or some type of public justice, well, there are plenty of people with one leg who do just fine. Like, just make better choices, right? That's not really an answer if the injustice to which I have been subjected was caused by someone else or some other system. Right. And so if we have inequality in our country, racial, economic, gendered, et cetera, that has been structured and created and maintained by really deliberate policies over time, the fact that people could succeed, perhaps some of them on their own, doesn't change the fact that we still have public obligations. As I've said many times, Madam C.J. Walker, first black millionaire, first female millionaire in the United States. She became a millionaire, selling beauty products to black women that white cosmetic firms didn't feel the need to create and market. But she became a millionaire in 1911, right? So with this person who said this to you, go, well, Madam C.J. Walker made it in 1911. So what the hell's wrong with all those other black people? Like, they just should have made better choices. Even that person probably wouldn't go that far. So I think we all know at some level that this breaks down. But the reason we say it, there's a psychology behind it, right? Because if we have made something of ourselves and we're sort of comfortable, we want to say what that guy said to you, because in a sense, that allows us to believe, well, if it was my good choices, then I'm covered because I'll just keep making good choices and nothing bad can happen to me, right?
Yes.
Like I'll never fall on my ass. I'll never be laid off. I'll never have everything go to shit because I did it once and I can do it again. That's a way of reassuring ourselves. It's the same shit we do with COVID when we say to people, oh, you lost a loved one to COVID, but I bet they had diabetes, right? Or like they smoked or they were like 200 pounds overweight, right? Because we're so afraid of death that what we're trying to do is convince ourselves that that shit won't happen to us. And what that guy did with regard to poverty was the same thing. Like it won't happen to me because if I can just convince myself those people are poor because of what they did or didn't do, then I can distance myself from them and I don't have to think about anything. But, we've seen in 1929 and 1981, in the most recent recession, even before the COVID was in 2008, 2009, 2010, and then the COVID recession, most of the time when the economy goes to shit, it's not about individual choices. It's about systemic policies and practices that leave people vulnerable no matter how many good choices they make. And we don't want to admit that. Not just because it has political implications about left and right and Democrat and Republican. We don't want to admit it because that's scary. Because the minute that I acknowledge that I'm not the captain of my own ship entirely, like I'm trying to steer it, but sometimes the waves are bigger than what I can manage, that's frightening as hell. We want the certitude of rugged individualism. The problem is when things go to shit, and when the system collapses, those are the very people who turn to opioids who the suicide uptake in the last 5 to 10 years, the big explosion in suicides among white, working class, non-college educated men, right? Why is that happening? Because those are the guys who all those years were able to believe that all they had to do was make good choices and everything would be okay. And then all of a sudden, when the recession hit, their good choices didn't mean anything and they didn't know how to cope with the reality versus their aspiration, right? What they actually got versus what they were promised. So this is an incredibly dangerous ideology. As long as it's working for you, it's working for you. But if day 365 is the day that the plant closes down or, whatever, or the economy collapses, or we have a pandemic that causes us to have to be at home and your job, it requires you to be at work and nobody's buying the products that you're selling, so they got to lay people off, then what the hell good is your choices? Your choices don't mean anything at that point.
So well said. So well said. I'm so glad I asked you about that. One more article of yours I want to discuss if we can. We got time? Where am I at?
Sure.
I always take way more time than I ask for with you. I always take advantage of Tim Wise. Again, this is at Tim's Medium page, and it's all linked in the show notes. But this is a really important piece. It's a terrible situation that's happened over and over. I don't know how many times this has happened in the past few weeks, and certainly in the past, but bomb threats to historically black colleges and universities. It's been happening for weeks now. It's terrifying. It's horrible. You've written a piece taking a look at, what could be behind this. And I suppose there's a little history in order, but it's pretty straightforward what you're saying, that racists threaten colleges and institutions to educate, predominantly black folks because black excellence threatens racists. Although I'm not sure always how conscious they are about that. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I found this string of threats that started right before the beginning of February, the beginning of Black History Month, and have continued in the first, 8-9 days. And I think yesterday there was a bomb threat called in at Dunbar High in DC where the first gentleman, as he's referred to, was, I guess, there for an event. They had to evacuate him. And we don't know exactly who's doing this. The authorities are saying that they think it's tech-savvy juveniles, which I have a very descriptive way of referring to tech-savvy juveniles in the piece that I'll let people read as to what that means. But I think that whether it is or whether it isn't, it is interesting. And I don't think it's random that these death threats or these bomb threats are being called into these black institutions of higher learning. And I think it's very interesting that that's happening at the very moment that a lot of white folks, are challenging affirmative action on mostly white campuses, right? So like these black people are taking all the slots at Harvard and they're taking the slots at Princeton and which is not true. It's absolute bullshit. But there's this resentment, right, of these black folks who are unqualified, supposedly, coming into these elite schools. But now it's like, no, we don't even want y'all to go to your own historically black colleges. Like it's essentially saying we don't any black excellence any black excellence at all, and maybe even more so if it's outside of our gaze, right? If it's outside of our view, if we're not able to see it and keep control of it and define it, that really pisses us off. Recently there was a story that Jackson State, football team, historically black college in Mississippi, recruited and was able to get, I guess, Deion Sanders, I guess, is the head coach now, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. And he was able to recruit the number one ranked high school football player to come play at Jackson State, as opposed to, I think, Florida State was also looking at him, trying to get him. And you go and look at some of the comments that were being made by people on some sport chat boards and people in Florida, I guess, who really thought he was going to be a Seminole or whatever. They're pissed off and they're angry at the very thought. I mean, Jamel Hill, a couple of years ago, she did a piece about this, I guess, for ESPN, where she talked about, that black football players and basketball players ought to go to HBCUs, just like abandon these white schools. They don't love you. They don't care about you. People lost their mind. Well, that's racist. And there are a lot of people who still think these HBCUs are racist and like these are segregationists. And no, these are the places black folks go so they don't have to deal with white bullshit, right? These are the places that black folks go, number one, because they're amazing schools. Number two, they have these long traditions academically. And number three, they provide a space of support and love where black people can experience joy and learning and teaching and love and experience and express excellence without having to constantly sort of filter it for white people. So they're amazing institutions that are not under the thumb and control of white people. And for some white people, that's a threat. Just like the Greenwood district in Tulsa that was bombed and destroyed in 1921, 101 years ago now, was a threat to white people in Tulsa. They didn't bomb that because they thought those black people were inferior business people in Tulsa, right? They bombed it and destroyed that district because they were afraid of black excellence. When you call in a bomb threat to Howard or to Spelman or to Morehouse or to Florida A&M or Grambling or all the different schools that were getting these threats, that's not a way of saying you inferiors. I am a member of the master race and you were obviously, if they were inferior, just let them fail, right? Like they're not going to just let them go to school. They're not going to do anything anyway. Like, what do you care? Right. But you're trying to actually fuck with them because that you're the bottom feeder. You're the one sitting there who couldn't hold a candle to them intellectually. That it's like, white folks, when they didn't want black folks to play in the major leagues, it wasn't because, we wouldn't want to embarrass Satchel Paige. We wouldn't want to make Josh Gibson look bad or, Oscar Charleston or Buck Leonard. We wouldn't want to show those guys up. So we're not going to let them play in our league. No, fool. It's because you're afraid they're better than you. And so when you call in these threats, it's a tell in gambling terms. You don't think they're inferior. Damn good and well, it's the opposite.
That's it. I mean, the segregation, the race barrier, the Negro Leagues, point that you're making is pretty much, it's the best point. It was so clear at that point that black players were equal to or better than, and and they didn't want the competition or they didn't want the mixing or whatever it was, but it was clearly not because they weren't good enough. I mean, I think sports has a way of, what would it be, equalizing some pretty obvious things. We can disagree about, someone's effectiveness as a teacher or a banker. But when it comes to sports, you're like, yeah, that guy's amazing. Right.
There are a couple of fields of endeavor where there are relatively objective ways to measure merit.
Right. That's what I was trying to say. And then you said it with bigger words and more.
Being an athlete's one of them. Being a singer, like you can either carry a tune or you can't. Right. Like we may have different taste in singing. And so I might not like a particular artist, but I can still say, well, they got a good voice. Like it's just not my thing. Right. But with something, with something like banking or something like law or something like any type of business, it's a lot about connections and old boys networks. And those things exist in the entertainment industry too. And they exist in sports too, in terms of who can you get hooked up with quickly that can get you in an AAU league, that can get you the right coaches or whatever. That can help. But it's a much more meritocratic system. And I think the irony of all this, though, is that, segregation. So that was because white folks didn't want the competition. And you might think then they would lay off the HBCUs because that's not in direct competition. But you see, here's the thing. Those black folks that go to HBCUs, as I note in the article, a disproportionate number of the black folks who then rise to the top, whether it's in the military, whether it's in law, whether it's in business, whether it's going on to get a PhD, which means now they're achieving at an even higher level, a disproportionate number of those folks went to HBCUs. So even though the HBCU undergrad student is not in direct competition with very many white students, there are white students at HBCUs, but clearly not as many. But once they get out of there, now they are positioned to succeed at this incredibly high level. So they become incredible competition afterward. And I think that is one of the reasons, whether, it's conscious or not, that some of these threats and some of this resentment toward HBCUs is being felt.
So important. Read it all at Tim's Medium page. Subscribe. TimJWise.medium.com. His latest book is really good compilation of many of his most amazing essays. Dispatches from the Race War, of course, always amazing on Twitter. What else? Anything else, Tim, that I should be plugging?
You want to talk about Whoopi?
Yeah, if you have time, I really do.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So your piece there titled Whoopi Goldberg's Suspension is Ridiculous. You're Jewish, a white guy, an anti-racist speaker and educator. What are we missing here? What's the point that has or hasn't been made?
Well, a lot of them now are starting to be made. Adam Serwer had a great piece in The Atlantic that talked about this the other day. I think the outrage was just this. It was bizarre to me that people got as upset as they did. It's very obvious. And again, maybe it's not bizarre. Maybe it comes from the fact that we're not really deeply immersed in a good race conversation. So we don't understand what someone means when they say something like what she said. As I say in the piece, she was obviously factually wrong when she said that the Holocaust wasn't about race, because in the eyes of the people who perpetrated it, it definitely was. Jews were racially distinct and looked at as an Asiatic subhuman, biologically distinct group relative to Aryans, right? So from the Nazis' perspective, it was definitely racial. Right. But we in this country, of course, are used to thinking of whiteness as this umbrella category that basically all European descended people now do fit into, even if they didn't always from the very beginning, they certainly do now. And so if you come up in America thinking about whiteness and how whiteness, ended up enveloping the Irish and enveloping Italians and enveloping Jews, even though there might have been people who would have contested their membership in the club early on, then you will look at something like the Holocaust. You'll apply an American lens to it, and you'll say it's white people killing white people. When she said that, she wasn't diminishing or dismissing the horrors of the Holocaust. She certainly was not saying anything negative about Jews. And I found it interesting that Jewish folks got so upset. Well, she's calling us white. Well, here's what's interesting about that. Whether or not you agree with that comment as it applies to Germany, because clearly the Germans did not and the Nazis did not think of Jews as quote unquote white or Aryan. But to deny whiteness in the United States, which is the context that Whoopi was inappropriately applying to the German history, is an interesting thing to do, because we clearly have matriculated into the club of whiteness. Now it's a provisional membership, right? Somebody wants to pull that card, and we're seeing an uptick in anti-Semitism. So it's not a permanent, it may not be a permanent pass, right? There's always people who want to contest it, like the Nazis in Florida the week that this happened, actual Nazis hanging swastika banners off of interstate overpasses, and Ron DeSantis sitting there going, oh, these knuckleheads or jackasses or what. I couldn't even call them racist. Couldn't call them, wouldn't actually talk about who they were. Imagine if Whoopi had said, well, the Holocaust was perpetrated by jackasses, right? The actual Nazis are being soft pedaled by a guy who's the heir apparent to the MAGA throne. And you have an entertainer on The View who makes a historically inaccurate point, and she's the one that gets put in timeout. And the point that I was trying to make in the piece is, it was the wrong sort of American whiteness context laid onto to Europe and laid on to Nazi Germany. But we need to have a conversation. Those of us who are Jewish need to have a conversation about the issue of Jewishness and whiteness in America, because when we try to run from it, I have, in my experience, seen lots of times that my Jewish brothers and sisters will try to avoid acknowledging our current functional whiteness. I'm going to say functional whiteness, because we function, those of us of European descent who are Jews, I realize not all Jews are. But those of us who are of European descent are functionally white in this country the vast majority of the time, unless we are in Charlottesville in 2017 in the middle of a group of Nazis. And then if they know we're Jews, we're not functionally white. But most of the time, we find ourselves pretty much viewed as just another group of white people. We need to be honest about that, because when we run from that conversation, we're ducking our ability, we're ducking our privilege as white people. Yeah, we are facing anti-Semitism. I faced it growing up in Nashville. I had teachers, who would tell me that I was going to hell. I mean, I faced that, right? But I also reaped the benefits of whiteness. And I have to be able to own that, even as I want solidarity around the pain that I experience. And I feel like sometimes we try to weasel out of the privilege piece by talking about, oh, but we're Jewish, and so it's different piece. And we gotta own both sides of it.
Yeah.
And then the other part of that is just that when I was growing up, the point that I was always told, and I think every Jew probably over the age of 40, at least, I would imagine we still tell people this, but I grew up being told, like, Jews are not a race. Like, we are not a race, right? We are a religion. We're an ethnicity. We're a people in this sort of broad sense but we weren't a race. And so really what Whoopi was saying, even though she said it clumsily and inaccurately in a historical sense, she was saying, y'all are not a distinct race. And it's like, there are some Jewish folks who are like, but what do you mean? Well, we've been saying that forever, like that, because we knew that's what Hitler, I mean, whenever Jews have been viewed as a separate race, it does not work out well for us. So I'm not sure that we should be running into that fire and be like, damn it, we are that distinct. Oh, well, okay. See how that works.
Well, you make a really, as always, there's a lot of nuance. And in our conversations, even as long form as they are, we miss some of it, which is why you should read the full article before. Certainly, by the way, just as a lesson, if someone listened to our conversation, they might say, I can't believe Tim didn't say this or did say this in our conversation. But if you read the article, you might realize that he did say that. I try to practice that with most people when I'm critical, especially I'm going to launch an email to somebody, much less a tweet. But you just, this point, you kind of touched on it, but you say Jewish whiteness is complicated. It's also a real thing for most. And you go on to point out the exception of Hasidic and other ultra-Orthodox communities whose cultural distinctiveness often marks them for particularly vicious attacks. And you're talking about their cultural distinctiveness in the outfits, the choices that they wear to grow their beards, the payas, much less, some even conservative Jewish man who might just be wearing a yarmulke. Once you stand out, that's different. And I just think that illustrates just part of the larger point about Jewish whiteness being complicated. It is complicated. You touched on it. I wanted to read that if there's anything more you wanted to add.
Yeah, no, I just think it's an important conversation that we have. And I feel like in this particular instance, we got so sidetracked by the entertainment angle of it all and by the cancel culture aspect of it all, which, I mean, that's part of the discussion. But that's not really the important discussion here is not that to me. The important discussion is, hey, let's have a real conversation about how race has functioned both elsewhere and here, because when you have that honest discussion, one of the things that you realize is, man, race has functioned so differently in so many different places. I wonder if that means that race is bullshit. Like maybe because if it functions, if I can make race and whiteness mean whatever I want in Berlin, and I can make it mean something totally different in Biloxi, Mississippi, and I can make it mean something totally different than that in South Carolina or in Virginia, because in the South, there were some states, it was one drop of black blood made you black. Others, it was 1/16, 1/8. That doesn't sound like science to me. Oh, so maybe if we would engage this discussion and start saying, well, what does she mean? And what does this mean? Maybe we would start to realize that this whole thing has been bullshit from the start. And then if we acknowledge that, then we have to ask the question, why is it that something that's such bullshit has managed to stick around for so long and do so much damage? It must be functioning for somebody. It must be working to someone's benefit. Someone must be getting paid off of this bullshit concept. Who is that? But that's just a conversation we don't want to have.
Right. And that's white supremacy and other names that you can name. But I'm going to push back, not push back, just add something to what you're saying. Someone must be winning. Someone must be, making money. I think that the more likely issue, and obviously you know this and have written all about this, and civil rights leaders and historians have written about, is what I'm seeing in my community, which is it's the idea of keeping it the way it is because I don't want to have to give something up or put myself out there or take a risk. So it's kind of a keeping of the status quo. You can speak to this so much more thoughtfully, but it's not always an overt, we're keeping you down to take your stuff and take a bigger piece of the pie. It's more likely at this day and age, certainly in a community like mine, it's, hey, I'm sorry that's going on. What do you want me to do? There's nothing I can do.
Right. I think it's two things. I think it's people at the top of sort of the social and economic pyramid using the notion of race to divide.
Sure.
That's a very deliberate, manipulative thing. And then it's the people they're manipulating, which is the rest of us, who for many generations and now several centuries have accepted sort of the consolation prize. I'm not talking about rich white people now. I'm talking about the consolation prize of privilege, which when I say consolation prize, I mean, this is the thing they give you as opposed to real power and wealth, right? Like the vast majority of white folks are not very powerful. The vast majority of white folks are not very wealthy. The vast majority of white folks are not living particularly large. But we got this thing that was like, well, here's your participation trophy and your consolation prize, and this will have to do. And we're like, oh, well, it's not much, but it's better than that black guy's got. So I'll take it, and so it's what Du Bois talked about as the psychological wage of whiteness. And so, when you're in a situation where you may see that there's a better, way to live, you might see, God, it'd be better if everybody had good health care and if everybody had great schools and if we had jobs for everyone and this thing called justice, which is way down there. But God, man, that is going to be hard to obtain. It is going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort. And meanwhile, I got to get to work at 8 a.m. and I don't get off until 6. And then I got, I do that 6 days a week and I barely get to see my kids and I just don't have time. And so it just becomes easier. Right. And that's what the people who are manipulating us with the notions of race count on, is that we'll just we'll settle for the scraps of a pie that none of us own. And that's what we do. And so we have to be prepared to act in solidarity. And if enough people would do that, it wouldn't require each of us to lift 500 pounds, right? If you had thousands and thousands of people lifting 50 pounds metaphorically, right, then you could lift the same amount of weight and move the same amount of mountain as if you got like 5 people trying to lift the whole damn thing. Yeah. But right now we're so bought into our way of thinking, and the people, who do the manipulating and have for hundreds of years, usually rich white guys telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. They know the play works. There hasn't been a truly effective defense against this play in 400 years. So that's why we have to keep working at it.
Such good points. So great talking to you. What was that, Du Bois? Is it a book, an article?
It's just his thing was Theory. He talked about the psychological wage of whiteness. He talked about it. He might have been in Souls of Black Folk. I can't remember for sure what book he said it in. But I'll look up in one of my books. I don't know. I'll try to look it up.
Thank you so much, as always, man. Like I said, I was going to take the night off, and then I read your article, and I said, you know what? I really would what do I want to do? I'm an impulsive asshole. I want to talk to Tim Wise. I want to ask him about this stuff. And you're always so kind to join me, and it made me really happy, and I'm sure everybody's going to love the almost hour that we talked. Thank you so much. It wasn't a day off. It was an education that we got from you, and I always appreciate it. Absolutely, man. Thank you so much. And let's come up with that theme song, man. Theme music. Yeah, you don't have to tempt them. I promise you it's coming. All right, cool. All right, Tim Jacob Wise on the Twitter, on the Medium. Get his books. Love the guy. Love him. Always learned so much. And he has inspired me in many ways to do some of the activism that I'm doing locally. I've read so much of his work and followed him so long. And I couldn't take the day off because I got to talk to Tim Wise, and now I got to share it with you. So thank you so much for supporting us and on this podcast. Go to standupwithpete.com and sign up if you haven't already, so we can keep doing these great conversations every day, even when I'm not supposed to be working. That wasn't work. That was amazing. But now I have to post it and do all the things, and that's a couple hours. And so, not exactly a day off. But I love doing it. Love doing it. Love you for supporting it. Can't thank enough. Now it's time to go skiing. Black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination.
change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.